God's story, scene 1.
The Genesis.
Or, help God, we messed up already.
In the beginning, there was nothing but God, and so God spoke, and there was light. Over the course of 7 days, God created all things. First, the earth, the animals, the fish, the entire universe, and finally, a man he created to be like himself.
Not bad.
But God saw that man was lonely, and so he created a woman to be his companion.
Not bad.
Everything was perfect. God had provided the man and woman everything they needed, and they were in a relationship with him, just as he planned, until one day.
Hey, girlfriend.
Who, me?
No, I'm talking to the other only woman on the whole planet. Yes, you.
Oh, well, what's up?
Well, I was just wondering. You and that dude you hang out with seem to have it pretty good around here. But I notice you never eat from this tree here. What's up with that?
Well, God gave us one rule, and he said that if we eat from that tree, we die.
Oh, please. Get out of here. For eating a piece of fruit, you won't die. You mean to tell me you've got the run of the whole world, but you're scared to eat from one little tree?
I'm not scared. I'm not chicken.
So prove it.
What?
So prove it.
So,
Hey, what's going on? Man, am I starving. You got anything to eat around here? Oh, thanks. Oh!
They had broken the one rule that God had given, and as a result, messed up a perfect relationship with a perfect God. They were banished from the Garden of Eden and had to spend their days laboring for food that had once been provided. From then on, things didn't get much better. Man continued to sin and grow more and more evil, and grow further and further apart from God. And that relationship that God once had with his people, his very reason for creating them, was long gone. So God decided to start over. He brought a huge flood onto the earth for everyone in the world except for one man's family, whom he shut into the boat with 2 of every animal.
They were just wishing they were dead from the smell.
Noah's family was saved from that flood, but they got busy repopulating the earth. Scene 2, the promise. Time passed, and even though God had shown with the flood that he meant business, people ignored him and continued to sin. But a few people really tried to follow him. One such man's name was
Abraham.
what? Who's there?
It's me, God.
God, what have I done that you honor me?
You have obeyed me, and so I make a promise to you. I will give you more descendants than the stars in the sky. I will make a nation of people out of you, and they will be my people.
That's wonderful, but I have this 1-bedroom apartment and
I will give you a land of your own. I will show you a wonderful land that I will give to your descendants. You will defeat all those who live in this land if you trust and obey me. It will be a land flowing with milk and honey.
Wow.
Now go.
And so the promise was made, a promise that would show God's faithfulness time and time again, even though it would be a while before it actually happened. Time passed. Abraham and Sarah gave birth to a son. God came to Abraham and told him to sacrifice Isaac to him as a test. Now, he was just about to go through with it when an angel stopped him.
Stop! You don't have to go through with it. God was just testing your obedience to him. Guess what? You passed.
Don't do that to me.
More time passed, and Isaac had kids of his own, 2 sons named Jacob and Esau. Jacob eventually had 12 sons of his own, one of whom was named Joseph. Now, the story of Joseph and his brothers is well known, so we can just kind of fast forward through some of this. Now, Jacob loved Joseph, and he loved Joseph most of all, and so he gave him a special color coat to prove it. The brothers hated Joseph and sold him into slavery. Joseph worked for a guy named Potiphar, but got thrown into prison when his wife hit on him. Pharaoh was disturbed by some weird dreams, and he heard there was a guy in prison who could interpret these dreams. Joseph told Pharaoh that his dreams meant there would be a famine through Egypt, and in 7 years, there'd be no food. Pharaoh put Joseph in charge of Egypt. Joseph stockpiled food for the time of the famine, thereby saving Egypt. Now, Joseph's whole family joined him in Egypt during the famine. Cheese. Now, years passed, and Joseph's family got larger and larger. This is where God's promise to Abraham began to come true. Eventually, Joseph died, but his family kept getting larger and larger. A new Pharaoh came into power, and he didn't remember Joseph or like the fact that the Israelites were in Egypt. He enslaved them all, but they just kept multiplying and multiplying until there were about 2 million of them. Well, Pharaoh decided to put an end to the Israelites once and for all. He declared that any Hebrew boys born during that time would be put to death, and it was at this time that Moses was born.
Ta-da!
Scene 3, the Exodus, or enter Moses, exit us. Get it? Exit us? Exit us, like exit us. Yeah. Like I said, it was at this time that Moses was born.
Yeah, I'm coming,
We're
I'm coming.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
I'm coming. I am Moses. Okay, here's the deal. Grew up as a prince, and then I killed a man kind of accidentally on purpose. Then, out of fear, ran to the land of Midian.
Welcome to Midian, land of mystery and adventure, and home of some of the finest merchandise this side of the Red Sea. Sir, can I interest
No,
you?
thanks. So, here I am. I'm a Midian. Everything's going great. I get married. I become a shepherd. Then God speaks to me from this burning bush. He says, you got to go back to Egypt. You got to tell Pharaoh there to release the Israelites from captivity.
Moses, you must be joking.
So here I am.
I will never release your people.
Tough luck, Pharaoh. God's going to bring his power down on you.
And to make a long story short,
Too late.
he did.
Blood in the Nile.
Frogs, ribbit.
Flies.
Gnats.
Dead livestock. P.U.
Boils.
Hail.
Yeah, we get it.
Locusts.
Darkness.
And finally, the death of every firstborn son.
Israelites, if we put the blood of a perfect lamb over our doorpost tonight, God and his angel of death will pass over our homes as he kills our firstborn sons.
And he did.
My son is dead. Go, Moses. Take your people and go.
430 years of slavery? It's over. Israelites, did you hear that? Let's go before he changes his mind. Come on, follow me.
And everything was going great.
We're following the leader, the leader, the leader. We're following the leader.
For about the first 5 minutes.
Why did you take us this way, Moses? The Red Sea is blocking our escape, and Pharaoh has changed his mind, and his army is charging down after us. I wish I was back in Egypt.
I wish I had never followed you.
I wish I was dead.
Enough whining. The Red Sea.
And you thought only SeaWorld had the soaker zone. And so God allowed Moses to part the Red Sea, leading the Israelites through on dry ground. But the Egyptians were destroyed as the water filled back in. Over that next year, many things happened to the Israelites. They wandered in the desert through the land that God had promised Abraham, the place that had come to be known as the Promised Land. God gave them the 10 Commandments to obey,
Here they are.
which they immediately began disobeying.
Oy.
They complained they were hungry.
We're hungry.
Well, so God gave them manna, which fell from the sky. But then they complained they were thirsty.
We're thirsty.
So God gave them water from a rock. Then they got sick of manna.
We don't like manna.
So God provided quail for them to eat.
Tastes like chicken.
And this is how it went for the year that it took them to get to the Promised Land. The Israelites were disobedient and whiny, and God continued to forgive and provide until at last they arrived at the Promised Land.
Israelites, we're here at the Promised Land. It's a land flowing with milk and honey.
Moses, it sounds good, but does it have to be milk? I'm kind of lactose intolerant.
Quiet! I've sent spies into this land. They're going to return with what they found there.
I am back.
Oh, great. What did you find out?
There are groups of people living there already.
What?
And they are huge.
What?
They will certainly make dangerous enemies.
Oh, great. Just great.
We never get anything we want.
I wish I was back in Egypt.
I wish I had never followed you.
I wish I was dead.
That's it! God said he would give us this land, and yet you still whine and complain. He said he would defeat our enemies before us, and yet you still refuse to believe him. That's it. I've had enough. Mushugala!
And so God, who had led the Israelites to the Promised Land, punished them. They were forced to wander the desert for the next 40 years. None of those who saw God's wonders in Egypt ever got to see the Promised Land,
Oh, man.
including Moses.
Oh, man.
And to make a long story short,
Too late.
40 years passed. Scene 4, wandering the desert.
Or, can we get off at the next exit? I got sand in my shoe.
Moses died, and God chose a new leader for the Israelites named Joshua.
Hi there.
Joshua was humble,
Hi there.
better, and led the Israelites well. At last it was time to re-enter the Promised Land. Joshua led the Israelites into the Promised Land, and this time they were ready to trust God and do the whole thing his way.
Listen up, Israelites. There are many people living in this land who will try to stop us from moving in.
Wait a minute. Didn't we make reservations?
Pay attention! Now, if we listen to God and obey him, we will defeat them. But if we disobey, there will be trouble. Come on!
And that was the way it worked. When they obeyed God and did things his way, nobody could stop them.
Woo! Yeah! Woo!
But when they let sin into the picture or disobeyed God, even the wimpiest of enemies beat them. And in this way, they eventually took over most of Canaan, the Promised Land. So when they obeyed, they won.
Yeah!
When they disobeyed, they lost.
Woo!
They won some,
Ah!
they lost some.
Woo!
And sometimes
Yeah, we
they-
get the picture already.
Okay. Oh,
Yeesh,
where
I'm
was
not
I?
17.
Oh, and in this way, they eventually took over most of Canaan. The promise.
Right. In this way, they eventually took well, what he said. Scene 5, entering the Promised Land.
Or milk and honey.
I thought he said elk and bunnies.
Before his death, Joshua gave the Israelites some instructions.
I'm going to die soon.
Die? I didn't even know he was sick.
I'm not sick. I'm old. All right, now, continue to obey God. The one thing he has commanded you to do. Don't forget about that. Now that we possess almost all of Canaan, you must go around and defeat the few remaining enemies.
And so Joshua died. And to make a long story short,
Too late.
the Israelites ignored God's command to clear out all of the people living in Canaan. Scene 6, the judges.
Or can we stop this ride? Going around in circles like this is making me sick.
The time of the judges was a really tricky one for the Israelites. They refused to obey God and clear out all of the people living in Canaan. And because of their sin, more sin followed. Soon, they were marrying people they should not have been marrying and following false gods. They pretty much abandoned God during this time, and so God allowed them to be captured and taken prisoner by their enemies.
God help us! We've been beaten and captured by our enemies!
Hey, isn't this kind of our own fault?
Oh, you mean if we cleared the land of our enemies in the first place, like God told us, none of this would have happened?
Yeah. God help us! We've been beaten and captured by our enemies!
And so, God sent them a leader to lead them to victory against the enemies who'd captured them.
Woohoo!
And this is how it went for 325 years. The Israelites would follow and obey God, and he would bless them and give them victory over their enemies.
Charge!
But then they get a little comfy, forget about God, and God would allow them to be beaten by their enemies.
Woo, run away!
They'd cry out to God for help again,
God help us! We've been beaten and captured by our enemies!
and God would send a new judge to free them.
Woo!
And on it went.
Charge! Run away! God help us! We've been beaten and captured by our enemies! Woohoo! Charge! Run away! God help us! We've been beaten and captured by our enemies! Woohoo! Charge! Run away!
Okay, enough, we get it. Yeah, take a rest.
Thanks.
Needless to say, they were caught in a terrible cycle of sin and disobedience that continued for 325 years. Now you may wonder, where does it end?
Where does it end? Where does it end?
I'll tell you where it ends. Scene 7, the kings.
Or out of the frying pan into the fire.
The last judge during this time was a guy named Samuel. But when he retired, the Israelites started whining again.
We don't want a judge anymore.
Yeah, we want a king.
The Philistines have a king.
The Amalekites have a king.
Why don't we get a king?
Yeah, we never get anything we want.
Now, when they told this to Samuel, he was furious.
I am furious. Don't you people realize what a king would be like? He would take your sons and your daughters and make them serve him, cooking his meals, cleaning his horses, fighting in his army, working in his palace. He would take the best of your land and your fields and the food that grows there for himself. You would be his slaves, practically.
Okay. Yadi, 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 blah, blah, practically, blah. Read our lips. We want a king, and we want it now.
So, God gave them a king.
Woo!
He knew this wouldn't solve everything, though, but he saw that they'd have to learn this the hard way. During this time, there were many kings. First, King Saul. Now, Saul was a pretty good king for a while, but then he slipped into sin and disobedience, and so God replaced him with David.
Bye-bye.
What? You heard him. David was a very good king, and during his rule, the Israelites finally seemed to be on track, following God and being obedient. Now, don't get me wrong. David had his little share of mess-ups, like that Bathsheba incident.
Oh, do we always have to bring up the Bathsheba incident?
But overall, David did have a great rule, and he was known for being a man after God's own heart. David set up the city of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and God promised David that his son would rule. His son would be the one to build the temple, and that David's family would rule forever.
Yes.
So then David died.
What? I just got here.
Said David died,
Whatever.
and Solomon became king. Solomon was a great king, and he did build the temple.
Go, Solomon. It's your birthday. You're going to party like it's your birthday.
But in the end, he blew it all.
Oh, man.
By disobeying God and worshiping false gods. Solomon set off a chain reaction
A chain reaction in the house. Hell!
that led to Israel's ruin.
I did all that.
Yeah, I'm afraid you did. So after Solomon's death, a kind of civil war broke out between the north and the south of Israel.
Northern Israel is the best. Southern Israel second best. Go north. Go north. Go north. Woo!
Oh, Ahmed,
What, Ariana Stein?
do you know what time it is?
No. What time is it?
It's time for the perfect cheer.
You're so right. Okay.
Okay.
Who's the Israelite that's the best?
It's me. It's me.
Who's the Israelite that's the best?
It's me. It's me.
Uh-huh.
Northern Israel, we don't want to hear it. Because we're the Israelites with the most spirit.
So go back north and shut your mouth. The coolest Jews come from the south.
You were so good.
No, you were better.
No, you were so good.
Oh, you were good.
Anyway,
You were so good.
yeah, anyway, Israel was split as a result of Solomon's sin, just as God had warned. So both kingdoms, both the north
Go north. Yes. Woo!
and the south,
Southern Spirit rocks.
Woo!
were They,
Woo!
they were. Woo, woo. They were led by king after king, almost all bad kings. Further and further from God, the nation of Israel grew.
Wait a minute.
Solomon?
What about God's promise to my dad that our family would rule forever and ever? These bad kings weren't from our family.
No, it's Jesus. Jesus is the king from your family who will rule forever and ever.
Jesus?
Do you mind? You're kind of wrecking the end of the story here. And besides, you're supposed to be dead.
Oh, sorry.
Now, where was I?
Further and further.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Further and further from God, the nation of Israel grew until scene 8, the exile.
Or we'll be back.
During the time of the kings, God had sent prophets to warn the people. These were men sent by God to speak for him, warning people away from sin.
Back away from the sin, people. There is nothing to see here. Move away from the sin and back toward the God of your ancestors. I'm a trained professional and know what I'm doing. Back to your obedient lives, citizens.
But no dice, nothing worked. So God brought the ruin on Israel that he'd told Solomon he would. Northern Israel was attacked by a country called Assyria. They were captured and hauled off to Assyria as slaves and servants. Southern Israel, now called Judah.
Who's the coolest of countries?
It's Judah. It's Judah.
Who's the coolest of countries?
It's Judah. It's Judah.
Southern Spirit rocks!
Okay, so Judah was attacked by a country called Babylon. They too were captured and hauled off to Babylon as slaves and servants. During this time, well, a lot of other interesting things happened.
In the news today, a man named Isaiah, claiming to be a prophet of God, announced that there is coming a day soon when God will be sending a deliverer. The man said, and I quote, "Unto us a child will be born, unto us a son will be given. He will be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace," unquote. For more on the story, join us at 5.
Apparently, 3 young men, Shadrach, Meshach, and a bubblegum, were thrown into a fiery furnace today and survived. More at 11.
In a spectacular story today, a man named Daniel is thrown into a den of hungry lions and survives. That and other stories coming up at 5.
In today's top story, Queen Esther, Queen of Persia and wife of King Xerxes, saves all Jews from total annihilation.
Reports confirm that 50,000 Jews returned to the city of Jerusalem today. These Jews and their families were taken captive over 70 years ago by Babylon and are among the first to return to their homeland. A man named Nehemiah has rallied the Jews to rebuild the walls surrounding Jerusalem while the rest of the city lies in ruins. I'm Steve Green, Channel 6 News, Jerusalem.
And so it went. Time passed. And to make a long story short,
Too late.
well, Nehemiah became governor. And he led the people in an amazing thing.
My friends, the walls of Jerusalem have been rebuilt. Time has come for God to rebuild his people. We have been returned to the promised land, the land that God promised Abraham. God has brought us home. The time has come for us to return to God and living life his way.
And in a way that happened. The people recommitted themselves to God, living his way for the first time in many years. Now, they didn't get it perfect, but it was closer than they'd been in a very long time.
Many years passed, 400 to be exact. There was not much recorded of what happened at that time.
We know that somewhere in this time, Rome, which was traveling the world conquering cities, took control over Jerusalem. They did not enslave the Jews, but they put a Roman king over the whole city, and he ran the place. His name was Herod.
Not much else happened during this time. The Jews went about their lives following God as best they could, but not knowing what it was like to live in that perfect relationship with him that he had set out from the start.
Until one silent night.
The cry of a newborn baby was heard from the depths of a filthy stable.
But that is the rest of the story. After all, a good writer always leaves room for a sequel.
Nice.
Sorry about
Very
the
well.
camera. I didn't know what to do. I thought I'd just get...
participate in this morning. This is a story that is a gift to us from God. He gave us the Bible, and it was because he wanted us to know all about him, who he is, and his plan for us. Well, I'm holding a giant puzzle piece in my hand, and that's because the story that we're talking about today is huge. It's the biggest story ever written. And kids, if you look at one puzzle piece all by itself, can you tell what that whole puzzle looks like? No. You need to connect all the pieces of the puzzle together so that you can see the whole picture. And this morning, we are trying to connect together all of the pieces of God's story so that we can see his big picture. And it's a picture of his love. And so Hannah's helping me to put together a giant puzzle here. And each piece of this puzzle tells a story in itself. And in this piece here represents a perfect God creating a perfect world out of his perfect love. And everything was perfect until that whole thing with the apple and the snake. You see, what happens in this piece, in this story, what we might not always see is that it's connected directly to the story of a promise. And even though people messed up and disobeyed God, even though they brought sin into the world, and even though they wrecked their relationship with God, the relationship that he had designed from the beginning, he said, I have a plan, and I will always be with you, and I will love you no matter what. So that story of a promise is connected to the next story. And in each piece, in each story, God is always showing up and showing his love to his people. So the story continues, and God frees his people from slavery, and he rescues them by giving them food and water when they're wandering in the desert for 40 years. And he helps them to defeat their enemies. And then he gives them this most amazing land to live in. And he does all of this, why? Because he can, and he's just such a great guy, and we deserve it? No, it's because he loves us so much. He loves his people. And his people thanked him. They thanked him by whining and complaining and disobeying. And what did God do? God showed up and showed his love. God showed up and showed his love. And he gave them judges to help lead them. He gave them kings when they begged for a king. And he gave them prophets who brought his message even when they were in captivity. And the prophets told them, go back to the way God wants you to live. And every time God's people turned their back on him, every time they forgot about the promise that he had given them right from the beginning, every time that they disobeyed God, God kept on showing up and showing his love. Well, does any of this sound familiar to you? Can you relate to these stories? Have you ever heard yourself saying, I never get what I want? Do you ever want to do things your own way instead of the way God wants you to do them? Maybe you feel beaten and captured by your enemies. Well, the puzzle pieces of our lives might look a little different than these puzzle pieces, but the big picture is the same. God is still showing up and showing us his love. Well, we've got some pieces missing from this puzzle, and that's because our story's not finished. In fact, we're about to get to the best part of the story, because God had a plan. He had a plan to fix the relationship that was broken between him and his people. And what was that plan? That plan, well, it wasn't a what, it was a who, a person. But before we move on to the next part of the story, I invite you all to stand up and stretch, and we're going to take some time to just thank God for the gift that he has given us.